So I'm really excited to welcome you all today. My name is Matt Hauge. I am with the Polk County Housing Trust Fund. We are celebrating 30 years this year of creating affordable housing options for our community. The Trust Fund is a nonprofit organization that provides funding, planning, and advocacy to expand housing options in Polk County. Our work is made possible through the support of Polk County's government, as well as Iowa's State Housing Trust Fund and our generous community donors. The support that we receive from the community and these organizations allows us usually to grant out about $2.5 million annually into the community for housing development and programs. At the Trust Fund, we have an annual campaign that receives donations to support safe, stable housing for all the people in our community. This year, we're excited that the campaign has a new look and a new name. That name is Navigating Housing Together. If you want to learn how you can become a supporter of our work, you can visit the campaign's website at pchtf.org/navigate. So today, we're going to delve deeper into one of the aspects of our work, and that is supporting affordable housing and programs that help people experiencing chronic and unsheltered homelessness. In just a minute, we're going to hear from local organizations on the front lines of providing both housing and essential supportive services. I'm really excited. She's sitting right next to me, actually, and she's going to scoot over in just a second. It's Angie Arthur, the Executive Director of Homeward, who's going to guide us through this discussion today. We're really grateful to Homeward for their partnership in providing this event. Angie is going to give an introductory presentation. Then you're going to hear from each of our providers. After our providers share their insights, we're going to open the floor for your questions. But before we start, I want to give you a heads up about a couple of other upcoming events that we have. The Polk County Housing Trust Fund serves the community's needs in a variety of ways. So we're out there talking about housing in a lot of different areas. Just next week on Tuesday, we are going to be taking part in a live stream with the Urbandale City Council about accessory dwelling units. These are smaller homes that share a single family lot with larger homes. You'll be able to stream this presentation on our YouTube. So if you look up the Polk County Housing Trust Fund on YouTube, you'll find right there is this blue video link for the city of Urbandale to view that live stream. It's going to start at 11:45 this coming Tuesday if you'd like to learn about accessory dwelling units and how they can provide housing options for neighborhoods. Coming up next month on September 19th, we're really excited to be teaming up with Uplift, the region's basic income pilot, in what's really going to be an exciting 2-hour event talking about affordable housing solutions. Uplift is calling that event Fixing the Foundation, Solutions to Central Iowa's Housing Needs. That event is going to take place up at the Johnston, Iowa Public Library. That's September 19th at 10 a.m. So we'll hope you'll mark your calendar and plan to join us for that event. So as I switch over to this fake live shot of our office downtown here in the Insurance Exchange building where we're broadcasting live from the 10th floor today, I want to thank you all for being here. You know, to stay in touch about all of the things that we're talking about, make sure you look up the Polk County Housing Trust Fund on LinkedIn or Facebook, or make sure to come to our website, pchtf.org, and sign up for our emails. We're always looking for ways to expand how we're doing outreach programming. This webinar is new for us. So we value your feedback and your participation today so we can continue to do programming that benefits all of our understanding of how to solve housing problems. Now that I've said all this, I want to introduce my really good friend and valued colleague, Angie Arthur, who's the Executive Director of Homeward. Homeward is just at the other end of the hall here on 10th floor. It's the nonprofit organization that leads the region's response to homelessness. And we're going to scoot, and Angie's going to take things away.
Great. I call that a smooth scooting transition. All right. Thanks, folks. Thank you, Matt. As Matt shared, I'm with the organization of Homeward, and we are the regional homelessness planning organization for Polk County. And our vision is that everyone in Polk County has a safe place to call home. And we do so in working with that by working to help allocate federal funds, partnering to create that community strategy and response, as well as exploring new funding opportunities for our community. So that's some of the work that we do. Today I want to talk about homelessness and how that works into some of the services that we have in the community, as well as is explaining some of those basic needs that we have and learning more about permanent supportive housing. I think it's important for us to know that we find that Iowans are an extremely low income, are extremely vulnerable to homelessness. And the information you share today lets you know that a family of 4 earns less than $30,000 is considered extremely low income. 27% of the renters in our state are considered extremely low income. That equates to a little over 100,000 households. And when you look at that from a population perspective, it's a little bit more than the size of the city of Des Moines. Or if you think about it in such a way as that would be the equivalent of selling out Jack Trice Stadium 4 times. That's a lot of folks in our community in the state of Iowa that are experiencing low income, extremely low income. And who are those folks? A third are seniors, a third are folks already in the workforce, 21% are disabled, 4% are going to school, 1% are single adult caregivers, and others are the 8% are other categories of folks that we serve. So what does homelessness look like in Polk County? We see a variety of ways that people experiencing homelessness, whether they're literally homeless on the street, they're sleeping in their vehicle, they're living in shelter, maybe they're fleeing domestic violence or couch surfing. We see this with families with unaccompanied minors, veterans, couples, singles, young adults, and unfortunately, we see a growing population of seniors that are experiencing homelessness for the first time. So in Polk County in 2023, we served over almost 7,800 individuals experiencing homelessness. And you'll see that 44% of folks identify as non-white. So there's a significant amount of overrepresentation of individuals who identify as non-white that are experiencing homelessness in Polk County. In our point in time count, so that's within a 24-hour time period, we count what is happening in that 24-hour time period. In winter of this year, we had 715 folks that were experiencing homelessness. And of those, 147 were unsheltered. And you'll notice that we have this information on our website. So if you'd like to learn more about that information and data, we'd be happy to, you can look at our website at homewardiiowa.org and find that information. I think it's important for folks to understand that we want to use data to make informed decisions within our community. And one of the ways to do that is through studies and gap analysis. We worked in partnership with our community with Des Moines, with Drake University, to put together a study that interviewed individuals experiencing unsheltered homelessness. We did this study in 2022, had over 150 folks respond to surveys and then in-depth interviews. And again, you can find this information on our website. But I think the important thing to note is that when respondents were asked about what they wanted for housing, they said anything that was safe, that they could lock their door, that was affordable, that they could keep and maintain, and that allowed them to spend time with families, friends, pets. So out of those folks that were surveyed, 141 out of 143 the folks responded said that they wanted a safe place to call home. So it's important that we listen to the input and the expertise of folks with lived experience. I think it's important for individuals to also understand that there's a system of organizations that are working to help folks experiencing homelessness. As you can see, there's a large number of organizations and names, and there's a variety of services. We have a centralized intake where folks enter into the homeless system, as well as some of the shelter systems directly, and having access to housing. You'll see that there's street outreach, there's prevention. What can we do to prevent folks from experiencing homelessness to begin with? Diversion, rapidly resolving issues for folks, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, transitional housing. And today we're going to spend a significant amount of time learning about permanent supportive housing, the benefits, values, and the importance of that in our community. So the important thing to know is that there's a lot of folks working on that within our community, a lot of organizations that are putting their time and dedication in to supporting and working with folks experiencing homelessness. Unfortunately, we know that we just simply don't have enough resources within our community. In February of this year, Homeward worked with consultants, housing innovations, as well as community members earlier to that with a lot of community meetings and conversations to say, what are our gaps that we have within the community? What are things that we need to be able to fully meet the needs of folks experiencing homelessness to help them in their crisis situation move on to supportive housing? And unfortunately, we don't have those sufficient level of resources. But within that analysis, it helped us identify some of those things that are very important for us from a resource perspective. We, for singles and adults, need to really look at the number of permanent supportive housing units that we have and need 523 additional units, as well as more rapid rehousing units. We looked at families and identified the fact that we need emergency shelter units. As of August 1st, we had 144 families that are on the wait list for an emergency shelter. So it's an important and definite need for us in the community. And additionally, we need more permanent supportive housing units. So we're excited to say that the state of Iowa is also performing a gap analysis that started earlier this spring and will be coming out later. So then we will have an idea across the state what our community members need across the state that are experiencing homelessness and how we can identify that and move forward with that. I think it's very important to note that the rental housing market makes it extremely difficult for folks that have programs and supports, let alone individuals that are also looking for housing. So how much housing would we need in Polk County to help us to provide support for individuals that are homeless or that are housing unstable? We have a gap of over 11,000 units in Polk County, and 46% of metro renters are rent burdened, meaning they're spending at least over 30% of their income on housing. When you look at folks that are extremely low income housing for us in our community, for every 100 households that are looking for a place to call home, there are only 26 available and accessible units. There's a significant gap of what's available for folks to be able to move out of homelessness into permanent housing. And I think it's also important to set context or understanding. So when you have an individual that's receiving disability, the average payment is $948. I should say that's the maximum payment. There are some exceptions, of course, if you maybe are a veteran, there might be some additional dollars, but that's what individuals experiencing disability receive. And the fair market rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Polk County is $899. That does not leave hardly anything for someone to live throughout the year. So you can see there's some system challenges. We'd be remiss to say that if we didn't identify the fact that a leading cause of homelessness in our state and across the country is a lack of affordable and accessible housing. So today we have that opportunity to learn from our permanent supportive housing experts in our community to learn more about what's happening in our community and some of those resources that we have available. And we look forward to moving on to that work. Okay, so for our first individual that we'd love to hear from is Cynthia Latcham with Anawim Housing. And Cynthia, we will turn it over to you to share a little bit about your organization.
Great. Thank you, Angie, and thanks for the great lead-in. That really, really helps to sort of tee up the conversation that we're going to have as we're talking about permanent supportive housing and how Anawim Housing operates and brings resources to our community. So I think of the housing continuum that you shared up and the different interventions that we have as the full continuum of care. And I would also add in affordable housing onto that continuum of care, as we know that it's a predictor for areas that have low vacancy rates, that there's higher levels of homelessness. So Anawim Housing provides a couple of different interventions to help support that system. The first is in development and the management of new affordable housing. So affordable housing is not necessarily doesn't necessarily have a service component to it. People have to income qualify. If you're looking for housing and you meet our income limits, you can apply and be accepted into our, and become a tenant at Anawim Housing. So that is the beginning kind of the continuum of services that Anawim offers. We also offer services for people that have experienced homelessness. Our permanent supportive housing is HUD funded, and because it's HUD funded, we have a certain number or a certain level of requirements that we're required to operate under. The first being housing first, and I'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about that later. The second is that we use centralized intake for all of our referrals. So as I'm talking about permanent supportive housing and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to refer somebody to Anawim Housing, there's no referral process to Anawim Housing except through centralized intake. For our permanent supportive housing. So we offer permanent supportive housing, and we are also, and that permanent supportive housing is operated on a scattered site basis. So across all of Polk County, Anawim has 240 units serving singles, families, and youth, transition age youth that might be single or parenting or a part of a household across the entire community. These individuals are hold leases on their apartments with Anawim as the landlord. So we work with about 40 different landlords across the community. Anawim leases these units. We turn around and sublease them to individuals, and they become Anawim's tenant and they receive housing that has no time limits to it. One of the things we like to talk about is the success of our program, because the effectiveness shows that when people enter into our permanent supportive housing who are coming through centralized intake, have been prioritized for our programs, and have a disability that's qualifying, we know that we're going to retain them in our housing at a 95% retention rate. That retention rate is really our primary number that we look at, because our goal with folks that are coming from long-term homelessness is to keep them in housing as long as possible. So we have residents that have lived with us 10, 15, 20 years. That is not uncommon. So with our housing, with our permanent supportive housing, I kind of am all over the place, but you have to come through centralized intake. You have to have a qualifying disability, and you have to be long-term homeless. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of that definition, but just roughly say you're living in a place not meant for human habitation for at least a year. That could be in your car, that could be living in a shelter, that could be camping outside. But we are specialized at serving those populations that are coming from really literally or unsheltered population. So it's the folks that you maybe see outside that you think, well, where can these folks go? And Anawim's permanent supportive housing is really designated to serve that population. The scattered site model allows for people to live anonymously and autonomously within the community, which means that they get to come and go at their units. They have a key, they can enter and leave, they can have guests come in. And as long as behaviors don't spill out into hallways or cause peaceful enjoyment issues within the community, they live their lives. We also offer supportive services to all of those. As a program manager that's in our permanent supportive housing, they are seen at least every month. Many times they're seen more times a month. We pair the services with the needs of the individual, and we work with the individual to help determine what it is that they most need in order to support their goals in life to remain stably housed. So we really try and focus on housing stability as our primary indicator for success. And then as people are stably housed and they come inside and their brains begin to heal, we start working on other goals that they may have. So because we have no time limit, it really allows for time for people to heal, to settle in, and to begin to make healthier choices for themselves. Um, I think the other thing that we want to talk about is that, how we help people. Housing obviously is critical for health, for mental health. Um, Oftentimes I meet folks early on and they say they want to get a job, and I love that people want to work, but oftentimes there's a lot of other things that need to happen first. So again, the permanent supportive housing at Anawim allows the gift of time, the supports, and the ability to tailor services that meet them in where they're at. And I'll go ahead and conclude there and kind of pass on to next individual.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cynthia. Now we are going to transition over to Katie Kamienski with the YMCA Supporting Housing Unit.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for bearing with me. I am live here with the folks over at Polk County Housing Trust Fund in their conference room. I had some technical difficulties, nonprofits and technology, they go hand in hand sometimes. So just want to briefly talk about our program at YMCA Supportive Housing. So like Cynthia alluded to, some of the same concepts apply for us. We are permanent supportive housing as well. The difference with us is that we right now do a campus-based model. We do have a graduate program, which is more similar to Anawim's model and scattered sites, and probably we'll get into that later with some of the questions. So for our campus-based model, we have 140 efficiency units for men and women 18 and up. And for folks that have experienced homelessness, some sort of housing insecurity, kind of a large continuum of services. Unlike Anawim, we don't take the majority of our referrals from Centralized Intake. We do have our own wait lists that we manage. And another thing I would point out that I think is important for the group is, all the pieces of the continuum when we talk about housing insecurity and homelessness, all of the pieces in our community are very needed. And probably all of the pieces need more services and more support around those. So when folks move into our apartments at the Y, they have their own private apartment, they sign a lease, they pay a portion of their rent, and they're really building a rental history up. And that's a really important concept. And for a lot of folks, having that own apartment is very important. And for many of the residents that are moving in, an additional piece with our campus-based model is that adds some added support and security and safety elements that for many of our folks, they identify as being, a really needed thing for them at the time that they're moving in. So we have a secure building. They're given a key card that gains them access into our main building, our community area, into the apartment building, and then into their own apartment. And we also have a service center desk that is staffed 24 hours. Majority of the hours during the daytime and early evening are by Y staff that can assist them with various tasks and answer a lot of questions that they have. But then we also have a contract with a security company. And what's really key to that too is even our security company, in the 3.5 years I've been there, it's been the same main 2 security guards. And so really building relationships with folks under our roof line is really critical to a lot of them. So the permanent piece, like Cynthia, this can be a permanent solution for our folks. They're signing a lease as long as they're in good standing with that lease. That can be renewed indefinitely. Right now, about 30% of our folks have been there for more than 10 years. So I consider that pretty permanent. But I think one of the keys to our program also are that people can kind of choose their own adventure, is kind of how I've been saying. I don't know how many of you, I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s, and I used to read Choose Your Own Adventure books. And that's what I really feel our program provides. We focus on being very resident led. And so for some folks, they might just need to be there for a lease cycle or 2 and, kind of get their boots back on the ground, get that hand up, and they can move on to something else. But for other folks, it's their forever home and they feel very comfortable there and they need that additional support. And so the supportive services, are all right there on site. And I think that really breaks down a lot of barriers that traditionally a lot of our folks might otherwise have in getting some of those services. So that includes a case manager right there on site that, some folks meet with their case manager once a month or just checking in every other month. Other folks might meet with their case manager several times a week, and that can change over time as well. And then we also have a lot of on-site services, groups and classes that really, again, we get ideas for what to provide there based on residents and what their feedback and what their needs are. We don't want to provide something that is not relevant to what people are needing and what experience would help them. And then we have our on-site pantries that are really critical to a lot of our folks as well, that have food, clothing, hygiene, household items. We have a couple of different weekly meals, and we participate in a lot of food recovery programs. We also have rental assistance available to those that qualify, and that has been obviously a really key piece to a lot of folks as well. And I think a big lift up that we've been focusing on is also just what are we doing on our campus to help folks build community. So how do the neighbors become friends who then can become family, and really building up the support system? Because I think what we all hear from a lot of our clients and residents that we serve is that somewhere along the lines they've lost that support system. And I think as staff, we can do a lot to support, but if they can build up their own organic support system, I think that is going to come a long, long way for them.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate you being able to share about the YMCA Supportive Housing Unit. We'll now transition to Emily Osweiler with the Greater Des Moines Supportive Housing.
Hello. Well, thank you for having me in the conversation today. I'm really happy to be here. I'm a bit different than my friends on this panel because right now I'm at a point where I'm working hard to create the opportunity to provide direct service. I do have 20 years of experience working in operations of housing, homelessness, poverty, trauma, all the things that, severe mental illness, substance use disorder, challenges that veterans face, and then the administration of nonprofit management, board development, fundraising. So Greater Des Moines Supportive Housing is an experienced new nonprofit in the supportive housing space. We're currently looking for a site to build a campus for 100 to 150 individuals, either coming out of a homeless experience or who have other housing barriers. We will address a continuum of resident needs in an integrated model with on-site, wraparound, holistic supportive services. For me, the secret sauce to the whole thing is the community of belonging that will be created amongst our residents. That is what will make it home, and that is what will make it successful. So once we're up and running, we plan to help people in several ways. Obviously, we're here talking about how housing matters. So housing, creating another option in our community for safe, affordable, low barrier entry, not time limited housing is a key solution to our housing crisis. Part of what helps the housing be successful is the myriad of supportive services that will be offered to all residents. Things like case management, food and clothing support, rental assistance, groups and classes, opportunities for job training, social enterprise, staff working in the building where they live 24/7, and more. So maybe you've heard of the 8 dimensions of wellness. If not, most people think about mental health and physical health, but there are other kind of aspects of wellness that are important for a person's complete well-being. So vocational, social, spiritual, intellectual, environmental, and financial. So we plan to have experts and programming in kind of all of those spaces with an integrated approach. And then, like I mentioned before, community is the secret sauce. One time I gave a whole presentation about how Maslow got it wrong, because I believe that community and belonging are the most fundamental human need of all. And so I believe that that is a key piece for what helps this model work, because a diversity of people sharing space and helping one another move forward is really what helps it work. This model is one solution to multiple needs. It makes an impact in both the needs of our community's most vulnerable and marginalized, and also people who have housing barriers and financial situations. My experience is that this model works. I also know where there are gaps that can be addressed. It's cost effective, it's sustainable, it's a solution that provides support both upstream and downstream, which I love. And it's a model that can be replicated. So our goal is to build a campus, and I know it'll fill up, and I know there will be a wait list, and my goal is to build another one. There are many kinds of success that can be found in supportive housing. So yes, there's the idea that people have, someone's going to do a 6-month or 12-month lease, and they're going to move out with a job and a car and an apartment, and sometimes that can happen. But honestly, success can also look like finding stability in our housing very long term, because they need the level of support or the community they've found. Success can also be that somebody won't die over the winter because they're housed. So it's always looking different. Where's Greater Des Moines supportive housing right now? Well, we're focused on this model and also focused on adding new units to our community. We can't do any of this until we find a site. So we have this checklist. We are looking in Polk County. We want it to be big enough for that 100 to 150 efficiencies, plus what we're calling our heart spaces. So the supportive service areas, the community spaces, green spaces. So it's got to be big enough. Ideally, it's within 1/4 mile of a bus stop and a grocery store. And then, bonus if it's walking distance from jobs and other resources like pharmacy, clinic. So then also kind of on that checklist, you have to add in the layer of are there political wins or political minefields. So that will probably come later, but I know I'm preaching to the choir. Right now, there are many people going to community leaders with complaints or concerns about this vulnerable population. Greater Des Moines supportive housing is raising our hand to provide one solution that will help in the greater solution. But it's going to be a team effort to get this over the finish line. So that's kind of where we're at.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, all three, for sharing about your organizations. We do have a few questions written out for our panelists. My colleagues are also opening the Q&A feature for those of you that are watching now. And so if you have a question you'd like to ask, please enter it using the Q&A feature, and we'll answer a few of those as time allows. All right, we're going to start with Cynthia. And Cynthia, we sometimes refer to these housing programs that provide housing and then voluntary social services to residents as Housing First. Can you please explain what Housing First means and why this strategy is important?
Yes. So Housing First is an evidence-based practice that is best suited to people who are leaving long-term homelessness with a disability, who have been prioritized through centralized intake or coordinated entry into permanent supportive housing. So it is the most supportive environment that's available for those who have experienced long-term homelessness with a disability. And then pairing that with the triage process that happens at centralized intake is really critical to make sure that we're removing any sort of barriers to housing for these individuals. So the goal is to screen in rather than to screen out. So criminal history no longer becomes a barrier for housing. If there's not medical compliance or if there's not sobriety, those things are not required in order to get into Anawim housing, permanent supportive housing, because we're prioritized through centralized intake, making sure that we're removing all of the barriers to our housing. Again, for Housing First does not, it works for a lot of different populations, but it is specifically evidence-based practice for people who are chronically long-term homeless with a disability.
A follow-up a little bit with that, Cynthia. What about the cost effectiveness? that you
Oh,
see?
yeah. So actually incredibly cost effective. And so there's different data points that get kind of thrown out there in different numbers, but the cost to keep people housed as opposed to the cost for them to be unhoused is much, much less. So we're really working on trying to drill down on those numbers. We've got some different numbers that come from like the National Alliance to End Homelessness, or, you know, the Low Income Housing Coalition, that shows that it saves, you know, $30,000 to $40,000 a year. But Iowa in specific is really great at looking at data. And so they're doing a study to try and drill down on what is the cost effective number. We know it's cost effective, but let's be able to show out exactly within localized data what our costs are to serve these folks, and be able to help that to, I don't mean sell, but, you know, we need to be working in data-driven solutions, right? And so to be able to show that the cost of living outside, taking care or utilizing tertiary services, emergency services, is much higher than being housed and being stable.
Thank you, Cynthia. Emily, we know that supportive housing is intended to provide a place of belonging and healing to residents, and that every person's situation is unique. Can you help us understand what success looks like for a permanent supportive housing resident?
Yes, I love this question. Honestly, this is where my heart is and my passion is, creating space for community for our most marginalized neighbors. The model of supportive housing that I've worked in for so many years does exactly this. There is no one size fits all. So not everyone has a mental health issue. Not everyone has diabetes. Not everyone is coming directly from a homeless experience. Not everyone is unemployed, and on and on. And so it becomes a very diverse group. The diversity means that not everyone is dealing with the same obstacles and barriers, and yet everyone is living together and healing together. And it really becomes a community where people pull one another up. They care about one another. They want one another to succeed. If Bob isn't at coffee in the morning, someone's going to go knock on his door. I used to call this family, friends that become your chosen family. And it really is the glue of the successful housing, the supportive services, the security, really the whole vibe and energy of the space. So it just, I always say it becomes this beautiful tapestry of life.
Right. Katie, we're going to give you a little bit of a two-part question because there's also a question in there. One is about the current wait length for the YMCA supportive housing. And then also, what are the consequences your residents would face if your program weren't there to provide housing and services?
Great question about the wait list. That's probably our most common question that we get. Currently, it's last time I looked earlier this week, we are at 88 folks on our wait list. Last year at this time, it was closer to 140. So what I will say is sometimes I don't know if that's a real number, because I think when people are applying to live with us, they're also applying for other options. So by the time we get to them, they might not need it. And I think one reason that we've had a significant decrease in our wait list is because we've been doing some really light touch programming with participants on our wait list. We are calling them or making attempts to call them, every single person on our wait list, every month, number one, just to touch base and to say, hey, how are you doing? Because otherwise it could be months, close to a year, if we weren't trying to have that touch point. And so just having that connection is important, but also to say, are you still looking at housing? Here's all the information we have as far as contact information, because some of our folks, you know, it might be hard to get in touch with them if we're not trying regularly. But then most importantly, we also invite them to campus for an activity. So every month we have a different activity happening that waitlist participants are invited to. In June, it was a clothing giveaway. We had our classroom set up with just a ton of clothing donations that had been sorted through, and folks could essentially have that dignified experience of coming in and picking through lots of different clothes that had been washed and sorted and presented really well. Sometimes it's a dinner, sometimes it's to pick up a goodie bag. So I think that has had a positive impact on our wait list. And also it allows them to come on campus and get a feel for it, to see, is this a place that feels good to me? Because it might not feel right to everybody for different reasons. So I think that has been a really critical piece for us. But going back to the original question of, what consequences would our folks face if they weren't in our program and receiving our housing and services? I think, unfortunately, for so many of our residents, they would cycle back into homelessness or housing insecurity. And I think a lot of those reasons are because, they wouldn't be able to address some of those other barriers and issues that have led them if they didn't have that safe place to call home. But also, our background check is designed to be very liberal because we want to be the place of second, third, fourth, fifth chances. And we aren't looking at evictions. And so we really are allowing them to build that positive rental history as well. And also having those on-site services just eliminate so many barriers folks previously might have had with transportation and things like that. And, one of the things I always say when we talk about the importance of the housing first model, and, sometimes people might say things like somebody who has been homeless or housing insecure and they don't have a job. Well, why don't they get a job? I mean, we all know these are the questions that people often ask. And, the best example of something that I tell people all the time is if you are applying for a job and you don't have a place to call home, and most job applications are electronic, after you type in your name, the next thing they're going to ask you is for your address. And most systems probably won't let you leave that blank. So then what do you do? So that's just such a easy example of the importance of really focusing on housing as an important piece for folks addressing their other barriers.
Thank you. Cynthia, you're going to get a two-parter as well here. One of them you talked a little bit about can you explain what centralized intake is and what role it plays what roles it plays to refer individuals? But also there's a question too about how do families with children fit into Anawim guidelines and within that the services that you are working with?
Sure. So I'll answer the families with children. So we have units in our permanent supportive housing program that allow for children and families when we have openings. We don't keep a wait list because everyone is triaged through centralized intake, which means if we have an opening in our programs, we reach out to centralized intake and let them know what we have available. If a family has moved out of one of our units, then we will take another family in. So we know that there's a shortage of family affordable housing, but our HUD programming requires us to focus on people who are single chronic homelessness. So when we talk about, folks that you see camping out in the woods with extreme mental illness, extremely unwell, they many times don't have the ability to do an application. So there's no application to get into our program and there's no wait list. It's when we have an opening, we go to centralized intake. We say we have an opening, and then they look at their triage list. And their triage list is based on a series of assessments that says, who is most likely to die if they continue to stay outside? And so it's a very dynamic list that they prioritize when we have openings, knowing full well that last year we could have used an additional 500 plus units of this type of permanent supportive housing in our community. And so when we prioritize people through that, we're ensuring that the person that we're getting in on that day is considered the hardest to serve in our community, that is the most vulnerable, who needs housing or they will die. And that's how our Anawim housing programs work.
Thank you. I don't know that this next question has anyone specifically, but can be open to all. Emily had touched about some of those myths and misconceptions. So what's the biggest myth you're all having to address right now?
I'll throw one out real quick. It's that people don't want to follow the rules and don't want to come into housing. And I think that with the unsheltered study, that really showed that we need to be looking at what the rules are. Do they make sense? Are they humane? And are they rules that you or I would want to submit ourselves to? Does it give us the freedom of choice? And so when people have a freedom of choice, and that's another basic tenet of housing first, then we often know that people will accept housing. So when we have a myth that people just want to do what they want to do living outside, I think that that has been fairly well dispelled by all of the literature and our localized data that we've done, localized studies. But that's kind of my big number one myth.
Emily, did you have one?
She's muted.
You're
I mean,
muted, dear.
I think it's the same thing. It's kind of what everyone's talking about right now too. So yeah, Cynthia nailed it.
I would say from the perspective of a significant myth is then the solution is the question, the comment is the fact that there's not, that people don't want housing, right? And I would say from a system perspective, it's the fact that we don't have enough affordable and accessible housing. And we need varieties of housing. We need the multiple units. We need a 3-bedroom or a 4-bedroom for families. We need a variety of those different options. We need maybe shared housing. We need single room only housing. We need a variety of things. So I think from a system perspective, that myth is that we have sufficient housing. That's not true. We don't have, and that to me is a leading cause of homelessness. So there is that question. Emily, what are some of the challenges you have faced in building more supportive housing for the region? And then you've talked a little bit about this, but there was another question early here about when and goals for finding a site.
Okay, well, maybe I'll touch on that first. I think our goal is as soon as possible. We've been closed twice. And we are, it's been really difficult. So I'm going to be honest about the barriers, but we have some resources to kind of keep plodding along and see what we can figure out. So we're trying to be both urgent and intentional. But yeah, the goal is as soon as possible. There's really only so much time and money. And so, I mean, just to kind of get into the barriers, I don't like the question, like I like the community and belonging question, but it's so important. So my experience and expertise is in operations, not development. And I have learned so much and also become quite cynical, to be honest, the last 2.5 years. So I'd say there's a handful of barriers. What's the most? I don't know if I can tell you that. I think, the obvious, there's the chicken and egg with site and funding, right? You can't buy a site with no money, but you can't put together your funding deck without site control because everybody wants to know where's it going to be, what's it going to look like. And so even if likely where the funding sources are going to come from, you can't really start down that path until you've got an address, right? So your greatest virtue really becomes time. You need a site under contract long enough that fits the checklist I spoke about without paying for it up front while you get your ducks in a row with the site plan and the funding. And that's big and that feels like golden ticket, but just to dive a little deeper on the funding, I have found that nobody wants to be the first money in. In fact, not only do most funders not want to be first money in, they specifically want to be last money in. And it gets tricky because so you've got kind of a timeline of different applications and when things are awarded and when you have to spend it by, and they don't all work together. I mean, somebody's got to be first, right? So that really has been tricky. However, I think the very real dynamic is this NIMBY idea, not in my backyard, right? And I know that comes with everything, but especially when you're working with people, that are unstably housed. So not in my backyard. People will show up and they'll have concerns. And then it makes it difficult for elected officials who are also very focused on getting reelected to make what may be a controversial decision. So I'd say that the city's zoning codes can end up being so restrictive that it requires a developer to go through a process that opens them up to rounds of public meetings where a lot of details of your project get litigated very publicly, when that may not even be the reason you're at a meeting, if that makes sense. You know, maybe it's about parking. And so it makes it difficult, because a lot of times elected officials have to worry about, you know, how they're going to please everybody. And so then I would just add as a last comment, it also takes a lot of time and money to get to the point where then you're voted down. So it's been difficult.
Appreciate your willingness to share the challenges from that perspective. One question did ask about clarification for centralized intake, and whether that is going to primary healthcare for homeless support services. And yes, primary healthcare is the service provider that operates our centralized intake, and you go there to exercise. Have that assessment to determine vulnerability and services that might be available. There's also referrals to other services in the community as well that happen in that location. Katie, I want to ask you about how do you support residents who are ready to move on from your community to a typical rental housing out in the community?
There's a couple of different ways when folks move out into community apartments. Sometimes they move out totally on their own and they feel stable and ready to do that. Case managers oftentimes still are supporting them through that, making sure, you know, they're ready for that step. But a really cool piece of our program that has been going for about 5 years now is our graduate program. And it works a little bit more like Anawim's program, where it's scattered site. We have a handful of apartment complexes that we regularly work with, but oftentimes somebody who wants to go on the graduate program might say, hey, here's some place I'm looking at, and their case manager can kind of help them vet that, make sure it's something that's affordable for them. But most importantly, we kind of have some guidelines that you know, we put out to our folks, and we regularly talk to people about the graduate program being an option. So essentially it's, you know, when somebody has shown at least like a year of housing stability with us, they're, you know, not having any major lease violations, they're paying their rent on time. We want to make sure we're setting them up for success. And most importantly, they feel like they're ready to move out into the community. And usually it's for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they want to be in a different part of town. Sometimes they want to be in a bigger place, or maybe you know, closer to family, friends, whatever that might be. And then we kind of work through the process with them, make sure they have everything that they need to be successful. And then most importantly, all of our supportive services continue. So we are able to continue the case management. They're able to come back and be part of any of the community pieces. We just had for anything that we offer, they're welcome. So essentially they're an off-campus resident. And right now we currently have 11 folks in that program. The first 2 years we can provide rental assistance if they qualify. And after 2 years, they can be on the program as long as they desire with all those other supportive services. This summer, we've had 2 folks move out, and it's been just a really cool experience. The gentleman that moved out in June, he regularly comes back to even help with our community garden because that was a really important piece to him. But it's so cool when we see the graduates come back regularly, because I think, kind of as Emily talked a lot about, that community piece is just the key to so many of our folks being successful.
Thank you. There's one question that talks about what are housing options and services are available for people who are couch serving, but still need housing that they cannot access through centralized intake. And there are a few programs specific to young adults ages 18 through 24 that do provide some availability for individuals that are doing that couch serving. But unfortunately, just very truthfully, we don't have the resources available to us in our community for folks that are in that vulnerability stage. The funding that comes in for the continuum of care and a majority of the HUD funding that comes in is for people that are literally homeless. And I wish I could tell you that the answer was different. It is just simply not the case. also there's not a lot of prevention funds. So that is something that is a need in our community. And there's been some conversations about how we could operationalize those funds, but those funds just simply don't exist. So I think that's another opportunity for us as a community, as how we want to respond to homelessness, knowing that federal funds are not available currently in the state of Iowa. 5% of the real estate transfer tax is utilized for a shelter assistance fund, which is a crisis response. In 2023, that equated to $1.3 million for the entire state. So there's an extreme amount of opportunity to expand the amount of state funding that we would have, as well as it's important funding for that crisis response, but there's not housing stability funding as well. What are some of those other options that we could do or have those prevention funds available? So definitely much more possibility for expansion of those resources on a statewide level. So one question, Cynthia, that we were asked about was Monarch Apartments and when are they thinking about opening?
Thanks. Yeah, so also I just wanted to throw in real quick, Angie, when you're saying that, so I know Anawim can't take people in our programs that are couch surfing, but is there any rules against YMCA supportive housing or in the future Greater Des Moines from taking people who are not literally homeless but are couch surfing? I don't know.
I'm going to report for Katie so we don't have to
Okay.
slide a little bit.
Okay,
But
sorry.
like, there's
Sorry.
no rules from that perspective.
Okay, all right.
Insane.
So
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Monarch Apartments. So we're hoping for we're still under construction. I agree with all of the assessments on how hard it is to get a project up and going. So the Monarch Apartments will be expected to be open towards the end of this year, certificate of occupancy, and then we will be working on pulling together our voucher systems in order to be able to take in tenants. So we're trying to go as fast as possible. Monarch Apartments will be serving 40 individuals that are prioritized through centralized intake as being the most vulnerable for a single site location. For permanent supportive housing. And again, that single site, I think, is going to be key, as we have learned serving people in a scattered site model, that sometimes there just needs to be a little bit higher level of support, where we are, Anawim owns the building and basically controls the building envelope, if you will. So we're looking forward to getting that going, taking in an additional 40 people that are coming straight from the streets with a disability, literal homelessness, and serving them well to remain in housing as long as possible.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time. We have time for one last question. So what's one thing members of the community can do to support your program? And Cynthia, since you were just chatting, would you go with you? And then we'll do Emily and then
Yeah.
Katie.
So Anawim Housing needs funding. We're funded to do basically to pay for rental assistance and some supportive housing, but it costs Anawim an additional $1.1 million annually to serve the population that we do. That's the 240 households. So while it is a very effective and very cost-effective model, we have to raise over $1 million sometimes to pay for electricity and other needs for the folks that live with us. So so funding is always the most important thing that you can do to support us.
Okay. Emily.
Yes, we do need help. Tell us where we're supposed to go and we will go there. We are totally open to every idea right now. So maybe you know a potential partner that we should have a conversation with. Maybe you know a prospective site that might be a fit for us. Ultimately, we only have so many resources to keep this moving. And like I said, we need to be both intentional and urgent, and it's going to take both political will and community will to make this happen. So taking all ideas, call me.
All right. Funding, like Cynthia said, is key. I think the other big thing that I always tell people is, first of all, awareness. So many folks, when they somehow learn about supportive housing at the Y, They're like, we did not even know this existed. We go to West End all the time for coffee and to shop, and we literally didn't know it was right next door. So awareness, and then after that, advocacy. So once people really understand the importance of what we're doing, help us advocate in the community, which hopefully can then lead to additional funding.
Thank you. I will add one thing if folks are interested from an advocacy perspective. If you would go to homewardiowa.org, we do have an advocacy newsletter and information and alerts about things that might be happening, particularly in the legislative session coming up this next year. So do know that that would be an opportunity. And I would say educating yourself, learning something, sharing about who folks are that are extremely low income. What does that look like? Who are those folks in our community? So just be an advocate would be a great opportunity. So I would like to thank everyone today, our panelists that were here today. Thank you for folks that submitted questions. I'm sorry we were not able to get to everyone. There's some really good questions. We just simply ran out of time. I also want to thank Matt and our friends at Housing Trust Fund for this opportunity to talk with you, to share about some of the programs that we have in the community, some of the needs that we have in the community. And just know that we can make an impact when we have appropriate level of resources in our community. We've seen that success with our homeless veterans, that we've had a functional zero since 2016 because we have the appropriate level of resources. So we know we can do it, and we just need your help and encourage everyone to think about it from a community perspective and move forward to make those changes in our community, because I know we can do it. And so I will turn it briefly over to Matt and appreciate that time today.
So I'm back. Hello, everyone, and thanks for sticking with us for an exciting hour of conversations. I want to thank, on behalf of the Trust Fund, Emily, Cynthia, Katie, and we're actually joined by Amy Kroll from the Homeward team here, as well as Angie Arthur. Friends, we have work to do. The response that we have in the community, these folks are working literally every hour of every day to provide an adequate, caring, and compassionate response. But honestly, we're also here to ask for your support and participation as community members. The needs of unhoused people are significant, but we can solve these challenges. We can provide the housing. We know that additional housing is needed in our community, and we all need to put ourselves in the position of speaking up and asking for the resources that it will take to provide the housing that will really be the solution to homelessness.